Welcome back to the Gracefully Wild Soul podcast. Today we are going to talk about phase 2 of coming home to your intuition. So, although I'm walking you through this process in a more linear approach, coming home to your intuition isn't so mechanical. It is not so step 1, 2, 3. So, I hope that you will just take what I am speaking to today with a grain of salt, and just know that the process that you're in or going to go through is your own. And it really is walking in a spiral. It's not step forward, step forward. There are many steps back, many steps forward, and it is a woven process that we all go through. So let's jump in. Welcome to the Gracefully Wild Soul podcast. I'm Kirsten, a mother and soul guide, and this is a space where your soul is witnessed and the frequency of your heart is felt. Together, we will have intimate conversations about the essence of life, the beauty of your soul's path, and our evolution as women and as mothers. Through channeled words, lived experiences, and the wisdom of nature's rhythms, the soul, and the sacred feminine, this is where the gracefully wild woman begins to rise. Today, I want to talk to you a bit about self-awareness. So last episode, we talked about this self-reflection point in our journey back to our inner voice, back to our intuition, and that gut feeling that we all get from time to time, and some of us more often than others. But in that initial period of self-reflection where you're looking at your shadows, you're beginning to dance with your whole self again. You're beginning to understand the pieces of you that you've tucked away, and most often those gifts that you have maybe turned away from. And so today, dropping into this idea of self-awareness, we're kind of in this new phase of the journey. So your self-reflection probably took you on some twists and turns. And again, it's an ongoing process. It is a bit of a side-by-side process with this self-awareness piece. But at some point, you'll come to a crossroad. And self-awareness really is moving away from that kind of mind aspect, that place where we're self-reflecting on where our ego might be controlling the narrative, might be putting forward limiting beliefs, maybe where we have made decisions from our wounds. And we're beginning to move towards our heart. We're beginning to drop into our inner experience, our inner world. And this takes time. There is no timeline that is formulaic or correct. It is your own timeline and your own journey. And for me, it took many years to get through all of this. And so please be gentle with yourself as you move through this process. So as we begin to move out of the ego, out of the mind, and into our heart, we begin to actually move out of this fight, flight, or freeze response. So this sympathetic nervous system response, we begin to move away from that. And slowly we begin to move into that rest and digest nervous system response. So that parasympathetic nervous system response. And that's when we're able to actually digest information. We're actually able to process what it is that we're going through in a particular moment or in a particular situation. And so we do have to get out of that fight, flight, or freeze moment where we're trying to just protect ourselves in order to fully process and understand how we can move through something. So Once we're kind of in that state and we're able to begin to identify maybe where we are triggered or where our wounds are coming forward, we can begin to just notice. And this is that self awareness turning on, just noticing what's happening in a particular situation is so much different than probably your old patterns. I know it was for me. My old pattern was to respond in the moment. I have to get my word in edgewise. I have to do the arguing thing, right? That was a huge part of my journey and my story. My career as a lawyer is all about quick responses, not letting something go, being prepared at all times. And so that's how I was living not only just my professional life, but my personal life, right? If I was facing a situation that felt challenging or difficult, or I was in an argument or a disagreement, I always felt like I had to know the answer and I had to respond right then and there. I was never digesting, I was never processing, I was never actually taking the time to understand what was happening. Is this a situation where an old story or an old wound is coming forward and I'm just responding from that wound? Or is this a situation where I'm facing something new and I need to maybe take time to think about it and process it? So this was the cycle that I had been in, right? So this constant immediate response. So once I began to move into this self-awareness and we move into that parasympathetic nervous system, we're actually able to slow down. And for me, that actually was such a huge validating point in my healing journey because I actually really am a slower moving individual in terms of how I process information. I really like to dig in. I like to know more. I like to spend time thinking and formulating. And so it's actually a bit against my natural grain to just quickly respond. It was something I was programmed to do. It was something that I could do, but it wasn't necessarily part of my innate natural rhythm. And so when I was able to begin to slow down and given an opportunity to think and then ultimately come back, I noticed what I was doing was that I was responding. I wasn't reacting, right? And that's what can happen when we're in this sympathetic, survival state. We're reacting, we keep going in this cycle, right? And we say to ourselves, why do I keep experiencing this situation? Why do I keep finding these type of friendships or these type of relationships? Or why is it this keeps popping up in my job? Because we are in that sympathetic nervous system response where we are truly trying to survive the moment, right? And we're not actually digesting what's happening. We're not able to respond after having a moment to reflect, maybe even go and take space from, the situation or the person, and then come back later. We're just in that reactive state. So when we move into that parasympathetic response, we're actually able to respond, not react. And for me, again, having that space and time to process was part of my personal healing journey. And when I began to do this and actually just notice, right? So, like, the first step is like noticing, hey, oh my gosh, I'm super triggered by this, right? I'm triggered by this moment. Maybe I'm being asked to do something and I feel like I've just delivered the world and I'm feeling unseen, unappreciated, unvalued, right? So there's my self-worth trigger and trauma coming up. And just noticing it like, hey, oh my gosh, this is happening for me internally is part of that healing process, is part of that self-awareness. The next step for me, and I think most people, once you are able to move out of that reactionary state, is to pump the brakes, like pause and say, I need to get back to you. And in the beginning, you do probably need more processing time. So you're not responding from that trigger or that wound, right? You need more time to digest and understand. And eventually you'll move out of that place and you'll be able to respond, maybe more so in the moment versus taking a huge amount of time. But there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I need a moment. I need a day, whatever it is. And that might look like emails, right? We are so programmed in our society to immediately respond to text messages and emails. And that in of itself keeps us in this fight, or freeze mode all the time. Like everything is so urgent. Everything has to happen right away. And if somebody doesn't get their answer right away, then you feel this guilt, like you're letting them down. And so even for me, that was a huge shift and change where it's like, okay, I received, I need to process, or I'm not going to constantly be giving my energy to something right in this moment. I need to actually set aside a separate chunk of time, a separate day to deal with this, to work through it, because I actually do need that time to research or process or understand what's happening here. And so that was once again a huge shift in my reactions. It was like I would normally react and just respond right back. But when I began to come into that parasympathetic state, I was able to respond in the timeline that I needed, that I felt, essentially good about, where it's like my body is not feeling flared up and it's not feeling that heightened anxiety. I actually know that I feel comfortable with this response. I had time to digest it and I'm getting back to this person. So I'm sure everybody has this happening for them on some level because this is our culture. It really is this immediate response culture. So just pausing and taking your time to respond. And of course, you can communicate, hey, I need to get back to you. I just need time. And that's okay. And if someone else has an issue with that, then you have to remind yourself that you are honoring you are doing you, and that is absolutely okay. And if they have an issue with it, then they need to work through something on their end, okay? Communicating clearly and setting expectations is a healthy dynamic. So this decision to move past this reactionary point is, of course, a little bit of that decision-making process, right? We have a decision tree. We're like, hey, we're in this situation. I can decide to do this or I can decide to do this. But also, our body has to know that it's safe, right? So even just making those small, minor decisions to not go back into a cycle or a pattern tells our body, it signals to our body that we're actually safe in this moment. There's not a threat. This email is not requiring an immediate response. It's not a threat, that I can pause and wait. And each of those micro moments that you do something differently, that you choose to do something differently, you are beginning to rewire your nervous system and you're beginning to really drop into your self-awareness, to understanding how you process things, how you need to process things, how you need to move through things. And again, the way that you do it is going to look different than how I do it or anybody else. So signaling to our body that we are safe is also a huge part of this journey. It is how we're able to keep ourselves out of this sympathetic response or reactionary mode and move into that response mode, okay, where we're grounded and we're coming from a place of ourself. And ultimately, this rewires our brain. This rewires how we view life. It rewires how we approach situations. It rewires how we see what is a threat. Like, is this an actual urgent situation? Is this a threat? Is this something I have to respond to and deal with immediately? Or is this something that can sit, can wait, essentially be digested and I can respond in an adequate amount of time? And ultimately, this begins moving you towards that step of rebuilding inner trust. And this is the golden ticket to your intuition, right? so much of what we know out in the world, we get these like gut feelings. We're like, oh my gosh, I knew deep inside that I shouldn't have gone to that, party, or I shouldn't have taken that job or whatever it was. And sometimes we follow that and sometimes we don't. And so we've had moments where we have mistrusted ourselves and probably gone against our intuition and actually followed the outside world or someone else's advice. And so as we begin to rewire our brain and process and digest, we're actually slowly turning back on that trust muscle with our intuition and with our deep inner knowing. It's like, okay, hey, I see you like deep inside. I recognize you. I understand what you need in this moment, and I'm going to honor that. And that is building the trust muscle for intuition. Everybody is intuitive. Everybody. This process, this journey is about coming home to your trust, to trust what it is that you know, right? So we're turning on that trust muscle again. And at the same time, you're learning about your internal dialogue. You're beginning to understand your view of the world, your voice, and how you receive and perceive information and the outside world. Again, we maybe encounter a situation where somebody says X, Y, and Z to us. And how does that land for you in your internal world? How are you receiving it? How are you, again, taking in this information, this environment, this space that this moment is unfolding in? And having that internal dialogue with yourself, you're beginning to understand, like, oh, okay, I see this part, I see this part, I see this part. This part's important, this part is less important. I understand this is what they want and they need, even though they're not saying it, they're saying something completely different. So you start having this internal dialogue with yourself as you come into this self-awareness state where you're really understanding how you process the outside world in your internal experience, in your inner landscape. And ultimately, this is, that cycle, that circle that you continue to go through as you have these micro moments in life. And you're, of course, also going through these self-reflection periods as well, right? So they're happening side by side at the same time. And so this does require a lot of time and energy. And so in this process, if you actually find yourself being more tired, more irritable, all completely normal. You are literally like, I want to say almost like growing a baby, because on some level you are completely reprogramming your entire internal computer system. And so that's exhausting, and you are processing information in a new way, and you're making change, and change does bring all of these different elements of feeling a little edgy and feeling tired and feeling doubtful of yourself and the decisions that you make. That's all okay, and that's all super normal. So, these moments that we encounter as we're moving through this self-awareness piece, again, we're going to have these kind of three major themes. We're going to see these triggers pop up. And for me, that would be like self-worth and value, and noticing how that's maybe manifesting itself in my life, and then processing it as well. But at the same time, even though we are moving through some of these hard things and these challenges, we actually are also moving through these little glimmers, these moments of joy and happiness. Like, you're clearing the space for these things to come back into your life. So as you've began this process of understanding your wounds and your triggers, becoming more aware of them, moving away from them, and understanding how you respond in a moment, whether it's from a wounded place, so you're reacting, or you begin to respond, so coming from a grounded place, a place of heart, you're freeing space up in your joy field. Like you are literally creating this new place for all of this beautiful light to come through again. And so I invite you in this moment, when you're in this kind of unfolding of self awareness, to try something new. That is, again, how we begin to rewire our brain and we, again, light up that place of rest and digest. We actually give ourselves an opportunity to explore something that's fun and joyful and maybe a little bit bold and maybe a little bit new to our, kind of prior patterns, our prior choices. So getting out there and saying yes to things is also a huge piece to this self-awareness of like, oh my God, I completely forgot that I used to love this when I did this as a child or as a teen or as a young adult, like before, I got clogged up in my profession or whatever it is. Reigniting that fire is also a huge piece to this self-awareness. And for me, that was, again, astrology. I already spoke to that a bit, how astrology and the stars and space were actually just something I really, really loved as a kid. I really, really loved it. I even named our dog Cassiopeia, okay? Like, I was truly obsessed with the stars, but I had disconnected from this piece of me because, we get into life and we're going through school and we're meeting friends, we meet our partners, we get jobs, we move, we do all of these adult things and we lose touch with that inner child, with those childlike wonders, the things that bring that awe and those inspiring moments to us. And so for me in this multi-year journey, as I kind of began to self-explore and rediscover the things I loved, I would just go back to those memories and they begin to come back to you as you're in this process. These memories will flood back to you. And that is such a key piece of information. Spend time with that. Like if a memory comes back from your childhood, just take note. What is it that you were doing? How did you feel in that moment? Who was there? Where were you? All of these little things, these are clues. They're like little pieces of the puzzle that are coming home to you. And so I just started to explore some of these other things, along with astrology. I learned about human design. I dove into tarot cards. I began to kind of dive deeper into different parenting styles and reconnecting with the elements of nature and paganism and all of these things that I actually, once again, was super drawn to when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I would read books on witchcraft and Wicca and nature and trees. And I was so fascinated by all of these different things. I went to a college that, although it was Jesuit based, I was obsessed with taking classes of other religions. I was obsessed with learning about spirituality and other practices and things from around the world. And so just re-exploring those pieces of yourself, letting yourself be free. One of the things that I also began to kind of come home to was my body. And so moving my body in a new and different way, but also in a way that felt very intuitive. Dancing felt so intuitive to me. And you can start these things small. You can start them in your own home or in your own privacy. And you don't have to be out in the world doing these huge workshops or whatever it may be, but just being curious. Allowing yourself to be curious is a huge part of the self-awareness process. The last piece that I want to kind of weave in here and talk about in the self-awareness journey. So this is something that is also happening, right? That in the moment you're processing all of the things that are happening, but I want you to also begin to notice your internal language, like what's happening for you as you are processing this information? How are you receiving and perceiving the external world? As I mentioned in a couple of places, one of my early experiences with meditation involved visuals. It involved seeing symbols and essentially almost like playing a movie in my head, right? And in the beginning, I was a little unself-aware of what this meant and why I was having this experience. But ultimately, what I came to find out was this was my clairvoyance coming online. And so I do tend to process information in my internal world in a visual way. Like I'm a very visual person. And it actually reminded me when I was a kid, the way that I learned best are with visuals. And so just actually understanding your learning style as an adult or as a child can cue you in to how you receive and perceive the outside world, right? And so this was the internal language that was happening for me. This was how my intuition was speaking to me. It was through visuals, it was through symbols, it was through stories, it was through myths, all of these different things. And the other piece that took me time to really come home to was understanding my body's wisdom. So I'm also clairsentient and claircognizant. So clairsentience is the wisdom through this feeling, the sensation of the body. And so I would get these like pings in my body in certain moments. And a lot of you will probably get that, like that when they say gut feeling, it's quite literally like you can get that sensation in your stomach where you're like, oh my God. And it could be the, icky gut feeling, or it could be the like, hell yeah, gut feeling, right? And, that clairsentience for me, it came later. Like I didn't quite understand that that was what was happening. But I did understand when I was beginning to go in this self-awareness process, when I was processing information and beginning to understand how I take in the outside world and how I internalize it. And then ultimately, the goal is to bring it back out into the world. I would just notice different things about my body, maybe tension in my voice or my throat. And that's a huge part of my wound of speaking my truth and hiding my sensitive self, right? And so I would notice maybe when I would start to feel clenched up in that area, or I would feel maybe tension in my shoulders. And that's the same kind of throat chakra, like that whole area is activated in my shoulders and in my throat. Or maybe I would feel it somewhere else, like in my hips or in my womb, right? So, like connecting back to that sacral space. And that is the seed of our creation, our creativity, and how we birth things into the world. And that creative self of me was dimmed. It had been turned off. And so just noticing for me what was happening in the body was part of my self-awareness journey. It was that understanding that my body was giving me information when I was experiencing something in the outside world. And the last kind of piece along this internal language was for me was this idea around claircognizance. And I'm going to dive into the clairs on another episode because there is a lot and there's just not enough time to go through all of them here. I just want to highlight, what was happening for me in my internal world, my internal dialogue, and how I was connecting, again, my internal experience with the outside world. And so claircognizance is this inner knowing. It's like this, it's more than just intuition. It is actually like when information drops into your field and you just know things. And you actually don't really have necessarily an explanation for knowing. It's not like you had a moment where like, oh, I went through this whole experience and et cetera, where you're like expressing empathy. It's not that. It is just this information that drops right in. And so this claircognizance was also something that I was beginning to recognize because a lot of times there's a wound around claircognizance where maybe you've been called a know-it-all or you're bossy. Those were two things I also experienced in my adolescence where, being called bossy was, a wound for me, right? It's like, oh, you always have something to say and you just know, right? You just know. And as a kid, you're like, well, yeah, I do, but I can't explain it. So again, this was part of that internal language, that internal dialogue of understanding all of the things that were happening for me when I was processing the outside world. So again, those triggers coming up, understanding how I just internalize the world and how I'm able to digest all of it and bring it back out into the world. So that is the self-awareness journey. It really is about following the threads between you and the outside world. And once again, it is a process that is always going on. It is secular, it is circular, it is cyclical, and you just are continuing to move through it each and every moment. But as you decide to take those micro moments, those micro changes, you're beginning to build that self-awareness. You're beginning to drop back into your inner knowing. All right, beautiful souls, I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thank you, love, for being here. May you walk forward guided by the wild wisdom of your soul and the truth of your heart. To find me beyond the podcast, you can join my newsletter at soulbabe.com for continual updates on offerings and other teachings, or subscribe to the Gracefully Wild Soul Substack. Until next time.